So as architects are becoming more and more invested in 3D as part of the workflow in building design, the idea of digital prototyping is becoming more and more emergent in design fields. And one of the areas that's really working well in the studio environment and the educational culture is the idea of extracting two-dimensional data to use with the laser cutter. And so this tutorial is going to walk us through, in particular, extracting two-dimensional data out of a three-dimensional design, which we have on screen here. In particular, looking at one portion of creating an elevation. So we're going to look at this one little small location right here, how I'd begin to lay that out to start using the lines of this to drive the laser cutter. So the first thing that I would do is create a new elevation of just that location. So we're going to navigate to the entry-level floor plan. And I'm going to zoom in on that location. And I'm going to actually delete the elevation I had there and add in a new elevation view. So I'm going to go to View, Elevation, and I'm going to orient my elevation tag to, I want it to be square on with that view, so nothing in perspective. And if you'll notice, the elevation icon is going to snap to different walls. So it's actually a pretty intelligent object. These little guys on the left, it's actually and right, it's not going to snap to those because I actually built those out of a component. But most wall surfaces, you'll find that the elevations snap directly to. If you are not snapping to it, you can always rotate an elevation to get the exact view that you want. But in this case, I'm just going to left click to drop my elevation marker in that spot. I'm double tapping escape to drop the view tool, the view elevation tool. And now I'm going to use the grips on each end after clicking on the triangle piece of the elevation icon right here. So I can use those to quickly modify the initial view. And now I'm going to double click on the triangle to navigate to that elevation. And I definitely want to be in the habit of renaming that elevation view. I'm going to call this Laser Elevation Classrooms. Okay, I do not need my elevation tags. So I'm going to say Hide in View Category. And I want to modify the crop box for the elevation just enough so that I can see what I want to work on. So I drag the bottom one down. I want to make sure I'm seeing the base. And I use the two sides to kind of move a few things around as well. So the next thing that I need to do is I need to add a new line type into my system to begin working with two particular things, laser cutting and laser engraving. So to do that, I'm going to go to Manage. And I always lose where this guy is because my icons have changed around a little bit to work on these videos. But the tool is Additional Settings. And if I click this as a drop down, you're going to see line styles, line weights, line patterns. We in particular want to develop a new couple of line styles. And I'm going to create a laser engrave and a laser cut line style. So this toolbox, I'm going to expand my lines, and I'm going to click New under Subcategories or Modify Subcategories. So I'm going to call this one Laser Cut. And I'm going to click New Laser Engrave. So most laser cutters work with a setting that's going to identify a color, and that color is going to set the intensity on the laser. So if I use a laser cut, I'm going to use a higher power and lower speed. That's going to cut through whatever material that I place in the laser bed. If I use an engrave, I use probably a higher speed and a lower power to just sort of etch a mark onto the material. So I'm going to set my cut to a green. And again, depending on the laser type that you have, there are very specific colors. I know for our universal laser here at Hammond School of Architecture, you need to stick with this set of colors. And in particular, I like to use the green, red, and blue simply because they're really easy to see on screen. And I typically don't have them working for other line types. Avoid black, simply because if you use the black, it's going to want to cut any black image that's on screen, which will include your borders, your title sheet, any titling that you might not have erased, things like that. It's going to try and cut all of that. So stick with the odd colors that might not already be in your drawing. So for laser cut, I'm going to set green. For laser engrave, I'm going to set blue. And I'm going to say OK and OK. The next thing that I'm going to do is our laser, and again, different laser cutters are going to work different ways. Universal prefers, for our case, the detail lines. Detail lines are two-dimensional data. They only show up in the specific view that you're working in. The other line type that students get in the habit of using sometimes is the model line. Now, a model line in Revit is a three-dimensional line. It is a line that's going to show up in every view. In other words, it exists in the model, not in just the view. The Annotate detail line are view-specific, two-dimensional lines, and for some reason, our laser just picks those up much, much better. So that's what we prefer to use. So I'm going to go ahead and activate the detail line tool. And to start off with, I'm going to select laser cut. Now, there are a few tricks out there that we can overwrite some line styles and actually use this base drawing as a mode to begin cutting immediately with. I really have not had good success with any of those, so to be perfectly honest, because there's a lot of things going on here that won't work particularly well with the laser. For instance, if I'm doing this as, let's say, I'm going to revise this to an 1/8 inch type drawing, or an 1/8 inch scale drawing, the dimension of this mullion might not be enough for the laser to actually create the right kind of cut. The next thing that happens is this little piece that cuts right through here and here will give me, essentially this mullion and this mullion and this mullion are simply going to fall out rather than actually be an object that's cut. So there are several things that happen that really, to me, it's more of a pain to actually, try to automate the process than to just quickly trace over some lines and get exactly what you want and perhaps exaggerate some widths and add in some additional detail. So I'm going to buzz through. That's the process that I prefer. That's sort of how I like to teach this mode of thinking. So that's what I'm going to be showing. So first thing I'm going to do is trace this outer edge. And again, let's look back at the 3D model so you can see a little bit of what I'm wanting to do. I'm actually going to be building this outer edge first, and I'm only really sort of building this piece of a facade. So ultimately I'm going to think about stacking layers of chipboard up to generate this, and then the next profile in, the next set of profiles in. These pieces right here are actually Infill Panels, which is a block and stucco with a stucco pattern on it. This is a project in Guadalajara, so we have really sort of low-tech building methods, concrete block, concrete, and then sort of custom built on-site windows and glazing. So let's buzz through that really quick. I'm going to go back to my laser elevation and let's trace those outer edges. So I've got Annotate, detail line, my laser cut line. And so the first method I'll show is simply going around the outer edge. So I now have that piece as a closed loop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that and I'm going to move it 50 feet off to the side. And I need to expand my viewport so I can see it. So I'm going to kind of ignore this for right now. Let's just not worry about it. I suppose I could have moved that a little bit further, but that's not too distracting to me. I think I can sort of follow what I'm going along. And note that 50 feet that I sent that off to the side is fairly important. That way I can sort of consistently copy things over. So this next time I want to do this in the next layer to the inside. And that particular layer will actually cover all the way across this piece. Similar method this time, but rather than drawing the lines, I'll show you the pick line tool, which simply traces items. So I'm going to select that, And now this one's going to go all the way to the window edge. That requires me to use the trim tool a little bit. So again, trim tool, always try and remember you're going to click on what you want to keep. And it looks like I over trimmed just a little bit. I believe I erased one of my lines. Let me add one more line in from here over, and I'm going to trim this to that. And again, I'm going to highlight one of my lines by hovering over the top, tab to select all the lines, and I'm going to move this item over again 50 feet. So you can see those are matching up perfectly. However, what I also want you to see is those are actually two layers. So I'm going to go ahead and move one underneath the other so I can start to see how they're going to stack up. Oh, you know, and Revit did something that Revit likes to do to me. Items are kind of sticky, so as I moved that piece down, it actually stuck that top edge together. Let me undo that really quickly. So I'm just using Control Z. I'm going to pull this view down again. And again, I'm going to use the Tab key this time. You know, I think actually what I'm going to do, I probably shouldn't have put those on top of each other. So I'm going to Control Z, all the way back. I love showing my mistakes in these videos. It's great. Let's select that piece again. I'm going to move it down. And now I'm going to move it over. Let's try that one more time. Now I'm going to move it over 50 feet. So we can start to see how those pieces are going to stack. And in fact, let's do this really quick as well. I'm going to go ahead and move this down just a little bit more, slide this over. Let's say that I actually wanted this piece to happen and stack up several times. So what I want to do is actually copy this piece over. Let's say that, you know, I'm working with 1/8 inch chipboard or something close to 1/8 inch chipboard, and I actually wanted this particular element to repeat, you know, and get up to 1/2 inch in thickness. So I'd actually need 4 of that particular layer to stack up. And what that's going to give me again, let's go back to the 3D view, is this piece that's actually coming out of the, you know, off of the page a little bit. And again, you know, I'm really not looking at building an overall model. Again, I'm just focusing on sort of what I would call a 2.5 dimensional facade of this piece right here. So what I want you to note here is how this piece, when you think of that as a piece extracted from the laser, fits over the top of that piece. So this is acting almost as a backing for that piece, one in front of the other. So let's look at, again, I'm not going to bore you with going through all of these elements, but let's go ahead and look next at the door frame. So again, I'm going to go back to Annotate, Detail Lines. And again, my door frames are going to be an element that happen over the top. I'm not going to try and build this little gap here. It would make a whole lot more sense and probably a good point to do a design revision to actually, you know, revise this door so that it's fitting between window mullion and the edge of the wall here. I'm going to offset that outer line in, so I'm going to use a different method this time. I'm going to go to Modify, Offset, and let's offset them about 6 inches, which is a little bit of an exaggeration, but I'm a little bit more confident that that 6 inches will cut at an 1/8 inch scale. Oh, that's an odd little message to get there. Not 100% sure why it was copying that out of a plane, but we'll just work with it here. So again, I'm going to go to Annotate, Detail Line. I need to get my baseline in underneath. I'm going to use Split, Modify, Split, so that I actually have 2 lines, so that when I trim them, I have 2 lines on the base, one for the bottom of each door piece. Again, I'm going to hover over one line, tab to select all of them, and I'm going to move it over. So this, if you begin thinking about, I really didn't want to move that piece around, so take a second here. You can start thinking about nesting pieces inside of pieces here as well. I know that I have a couple of door frames that I'm going to need, so I might copy that over a time or two. So that begins to give me the door frames that are going to fit here and here. So let's look at cutting out some of the mullions next. So on my mullions, again, I am not confident that I'm going to be able to get this kind of width. I want to cut out a little bit of a thicker mullion piece on these squares. So I'm going to start with the overall windows here and the overall window here, and then inset using the offset tool, the window opening. So again, I'm going to use Annotate, Detail Line. This time I'll use the square tool to draw from outside edge and outside edge, like that. And now I'm going to use Offset again, Modify, Offset, and I'm going to stick with that 6-inch mark. Well, let's sneak it down just a little bit. Let's do about a 4-inch, which is a little bit of a lie. But again, we're building a model, and I'm wanting to make sure that we actually have enough tolerance in the thickness that the laser is going to cut, so that I'm not just, turning a piece of chipboard into, vapor with the laser. It's still odd, that little error message that I'm getting, but that's okay. So now I'm going to draw in a couple of extra lines right here. Annotate, Detail Line. And I really want this line to be at the top of the door. I'm going to offset the line down 4 inches. And now I'm going to use the split tool again. Here and here. And again, that split tool allows me to trim without having to draw new lines in. Annotate, Detail Line. And again, this is probably the line I'm most interested in for my model. And then I'm going to offset that down 4 inches. And again, I'm going to use the split tool here and here, so that when I trim, again, you can see I split right here. That's divided that line into 2 pieces, so that when I trim, I don't lose the entirety of my line. And I've got one more at the base, 4 inches up, trim, and I need to trim at the top as well. So I would repeat that process to begin infilling on this window set, but I want to do one more piece with this element right here. So this is an inset. At the end of this project, I'll have one piece that is sort of a backer for everything that I'm building up off of. So to do that, again, if we just look at that, I would say Annotate, Detail Lines, Laser Cut, and I'm going to go edge to edge. So think of this piece. I'll move it down for a minute, as the back piece that everything is building or stacking up off of. Sort of imagine it coming up away from the screen. So I'm going to move that back down. So this is cutting away all the way to this inset piece here and here, with mullions and window openings stacking up vertically on top of that. So in this location here and here, I would begin working through putting some detail lines to create an engraving on this very back piece. And one of the locations I would do that is for this piece, which is a concrete block. Again, let's look at it in this view, which is this element right here and here. As yeah, that's correct. This piece here and here. And then again, imagine this piece stacking up further, the mullion stacking up further as I'm building things along. So let's go back to that elevation view again. So what I'm going to do with this particular piece is use the Annotate detail line, but this time rather than laser cut, I'm going to use laser engrave, which is a blue line. And what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to start by adding in the two squares. And this time I'm going to use offset. And let's offset by 1 inch. That's going to be too small. Let's offset. You know, again, I'm working at a 1-to-1 scale here. Eventually this will be an 1/8 inch scale. So at a 1-to-1 scale, you know, the markings or the pattern that we want is probably about a 4-inch sort of striping, maybe a 2-inch striping. Let's stick with it as a 4-inch piece for right now. So what I'm going to do is once I have my first piece, I can work with a couple of systems here. I can either use copy and sort of quickly build it up. Like that. So I'm going to say copy multiple to sort of finish it off. Or I could also come in and say, I want this to be an array. I'm going to move to the second position, and I'm going to move that line 4 inches. And then I want to repeat that. Let's try 8 times. And that wasn't enough. Let's go up to 12. So I could use array as another option as well. And then perhaps I want to delete that very last one right there. So that would allow me then to have this piece. I'm going to move it down. And now I'm going to make sure I'm doing a right lasso because I do not want to over select. I'm going to pick the outside edge endpoint down to the outside edge endpoint. And those are going to be located exactly where I need them to be based on sort of an out to out. So if I were to move this over from here to here, you can see those are actually going to be showing up in the exact right location when they're cut as part of this back template all the way to the base. So the other things that I could do then, let's say that I actually want this back piece to be open where the window mullions are as well. I might want to come in and add in this last set of windows, copy, and I know that would actually give me a complete cut all the way through, and that would give me a location to begin stacking the mullion pieces up on this as well. So that's actually an opening, and you can begin to see where the mullions would be at in location. And then I'm stacking pieces vertically up off of this back template. Again, what the laser gives us an opportunity to do, to me, it's not about just quickly cutting out two-dimensional shapes, but it actually gives us the opportunity, to think about more repetitive elements where I can begin to build up a building facade that has more depth designed into the facade, simply by the fact that it doesn't take me any longer to make these 4 pieces and to give this some really nice 3-dimensional depth and to stack up 2 or 3 sets of mullions. All I have to do is copy those lines over, and what I get immediately out of that is the idea of a lot of depth in the building facade with incredible accuracy, because the laser is going to cut in a very precise kind of way. So think about using the laser in that kind of way. Revit works great. Use the elevation as a background template and stick with detail lines.